Oh, goody.
All right, what's going on, everybody? Zombies here again, and today we're back with a Marvel Snap video. So, yeah, this one gonna be a bit of a rant. So we got the patch this week. I don't know if this is gonna go up the day of the patch or the day after. I haven't decided yet. Normally, what I like to do is I like to take a look at the patch and the cards that have been changed and deck brew some interesting things to try out with the cards that have been adjusted. That's usually how I like to approach new patch content. I think it's fun, people generally respond to it well, and as a brewer, it's just something I generally enjoy. However, we're not really going to be doing that today, and there are two main reasons why. One, I don't really find most of the changes in this patch to be too inspiring in terms of new things to actually brew with. I think in terms of the recent patches, it's actually one of the weakest in terms of things that are actually exciting in terms of revisiting old cards or maybe trying to find something new with a card that has gotten changed or improved. But the big one here is I am just really fucking pissed about what they did to Elsa Bloodstone. So if you're here for the decks, if you're here for the new stuff, totally cool. But this is much more of a rant on Elsa Bloodstone. So if you're here for that, awesome. If you're not, that's okay too. But I'm just letting you know ahead of time, if you don't like a ranty style of video, this is probably not going to be the thing for you. So getting that disclaimer out of the way. Let's talk about the murder of Elsa Bloodstone. For those who may not know the history, Elsa is one of the most busted season pass cards ever made. She was originally a 2/2 that gave +3 to a card anytime you filled a lane with it across all the lanes. This card was broken, like stupid broken, arguably one of, if not the best season pass card since probably original Zabu and Surfer. I really do think it was on that level. Loki was still really popular at the time, but even established Loki mains will tell you back when Elsa was in her original form, you weren't playing a Loki deck with Elsa, you were playing an Elsa deck with Loki. Elsa was busted. And Elsa also made history as the first Snap card to actually get nerfed before it went out of the season pass. Something that has never happened before then, and has never happened since. And nerfing Elsa was something that was completely justified. The card was overpowered. It was completely dominating the game and warping the whole game around it. It needed to be changed. A lot of people were happy that she got changed, myself included. But unfortunately, they went kind of hard on Elsa and she really kind of faded into obscurity. Now, the initial change to Elsa was just lowering her buff from a +3 to a +2. And honestly, it really wasn't that bad of a card, but coming off of the fact of how good the original was, as well as the fact that other cards were still really, really strong, like Loki, and then shortly following Elsa, Miss Marvel, it just made her kind of fade away. The effect wasn't really worth building around, and it definitely didn't help that some other cards in the Elsa package, namely Kitty and Angela, were kind of nerfed preemptively before Elsa's arrival, so the whole package around Elsa was just cards that had all been nerfed, which usually makes people move away from them, especially when there's stronger stuff to be doing. But then they decided to go a different direction with Elsa. For some reason, they are very set on this philosophy that 2-drop cards are not allowed to affect multiple lanes. This started with Luke Cage, which I think at the time was a reasonable decision. It makes sense that a 2-drop shouldn't be protecting all 3 of your lanes, especially when scalers were predominantly the big meta thing to do, and that just made them really impossible to counter for most decks. However, I really disagree with the fact that getting a buff in an additional lane is too much to ask of a 2-drop, when the fact that filling up multiple lanes to actually achieve that buff is not something that's very easy to do in Marvel Snap, and also comes with its own downsides of the fact that you're filling your board. You can't put more cards there unless you're using something that specifically gets around that, like one of the move cards or Kitty Pride. But if you're not using one of those few cards, there is a downside. Your lane is full, your opponent knows how much power you have there, and they can choose to outpower you if they have the cards available. The other thing that happened with Elsa was they changed how her functionality worked in terms of timing her effect. I'm going to read the original developer notes from when Elsa was changed to a 2-3 and her timing was changed as well. There are two major changes here, one to how Elsa is triggered and another to where. We previously placed Elsa's effect in the same timing window as Shuri, because we thought it would pair better with some lesser played cards. However, we saw early after her release that players mostly found this confusing when a location was filled with an on-reveal card or an after trigger. So we're changing your timing to use the after window like Angela and line up with expectations. Similar to the philosophical decision for Luke Cage, we've also decided to limit Elsa's multi-location buff. It was an element of her strength as a 2-cost we did not want. The new timing is a buff, and her strength is mostly focused on a single location, but we didn't want to accidentally over-nerf her, so we're adding a power for compensation. Now, I really want to mention when that change was made, myself, as well as many other people in the creator program, gave quite a bit of feedback that the Elsa change wasn't any more confusing with the new way compared to the old way, and if anything, giving people a whole month, actually this was in December, so giving people a whole 2 months to learn how the card worked, and then suddenly changing it on everybody was just as confusing, if not more confusing, than the people who didn't get it on the first time when it didn't work how they thought it would. That seemed like such a weird thing to change, and despite them framing it as, oh, this is actually a buff, please tell me in the comments how many times you actually saw people use Elsa to get that buff off of a token or something. People did not do it because it was bad. But hey, it only took them 3 months to figure out, wow, we actually had it right the first time. Good job, Miss Marvel thumbs up right there. So let's read what they have decided to say about Elsa Bloodstone and what they decided to do to her. Similar to our notes around Luke Cage last month, we decided we took the wrong tactic with Elsa Bloodstone. A rebalance to keep this effect local aimed to maintain Elsa's strength as a 2-cost build around, but the numbers necessary to make that work don't line up with our goals, which is killing the card. So we're shifting Elsa up in cost to a 3-3, Silver Surfer players rejoice, and widening the effect to all locations once again. We're also restoring the previous functionality so that Elsa applies the power buff before on reveal resolve rather than after. We've decided to accept that both versions have some potential to be confusing. Gee, I wonder who told you guys that, like 3 months ago. I don't know. I can't believe it took only 3 months to figure out that, yeah, both were confusing. Neither one of these is straightforward. Shocking. But the original execution seems to have more clearly lined up with players' expectations and existing content than our revision. Yeah, no shit. When people learn how something works, it turns out they're more confused when it stops working that way. And it also turns out it was just flat out worse. Elsa will once more be able to buff cards like Beast and unable to buff Brood. So we have a 3-3 Elsa that gives +2 power when you fill a location, any of the locations. I just want to start off by saying this philosophy about 2-drops is fucking stupid. There is no good reason that this card needs to be treated the same as Luke Cage when the impact those cards had is drastically different in terms of what they were doing to the game as a 2-drop. And it seems absolutely insane to me they're scared about a 2-drop potentially putting a little bit more power in lanes that it is not in itself, when we have decks that are going massively tall and over the top to where go wide strategies are not nearly as popular anymore. It just seems like an incredibly weird hill to die on, and it's kind of a classic second dinner tactic where they come up with some weird bullshit arbitrary rule and then work backwards to justify it, rather than actually backing up what they're trying to do with something logical from the start. I'm sorry, but I don't buy that shit, that the numbers necessary to make that work don't line up. I think that is a load of crap. What makes this even worse is Elsa saw almost no play for quite a long time, only until about a week ago. With the release of Hope Summers, people actually had a bit of a reason to experiment with Elsa and Kitty again. And myself, as well as many of the other players I've engaged with, really enjoyed getting to play these cards that had been previously kind of unusable for months. This is another classic instance of their patch cycle fundamentally not working well with the game. This patch was likely locked in about a month ago or so, as that's how far out they typically finalize these. And back then, I'm sure it looked like Elsa really needed a buff. But 2.3 Elsa has finally been kind of serviceable again, but no, here's the patch just in time to rip away that finally playable card and replace it with one that is just worse. It is just worse. Changing this card from a 2.3 to a 3.3 drastically limits how much time you have to actually make use of this effect. It also really messes with your curve in specific with decks like Hope Summers, not only because you can't play it before Hope, but also because you can no longer combo it with Hope on turn 4, where you can't just play an Elsa and a 2-drop, or Elsa and 2 1-drops. It is significantly worse. And the fact that it's going to buff up side locations again, that's not good enough to compensate. I mean, for fuck's sake, they could have made it a 3-4 like Luke Cage at least. This is just a joke. And unfortunately, I bet it's going to take them another 3 fucking months or more to realize, oh hey, yeah, this wasn't actually a buff. And a lot of people aren't super happy with it because they've been waiting for this card to be good again for a long time. Now it finally starts being good again and we just fuck it up again. It's actually almost impressive how much they've managed to just do terrible things to this card every single time. I enjoy brewing decks. I enjoy a challenge of building around a card. I can't see a world where a 3-3 Elsa is worth building around. It comes down too late in the game, and the effect is just not adding enough power to fully build your deck around filling out all these lanes when your payoff for that is relatively small. It's just not worth it. And that fucking sucks. It feels so much worse, especially because the card was finally seeing a little bit of play again. But no, we are apparently not allowed to have fun with Elsa. So I would like to pose a challenge to you, the viewer. I would love to see someone come up with an Elsa deck that is not objectively worse than the Elsa decks that have been played this past week before the change. I genuinely would love someone to come up with an Elsa deck that is actually worth including her and worth building around. Because I just don't see it. I've tried out some different ideas and they all seem fucking terrible. This card just seems awful. And honestly, I really question how much they have actually played this card as a 3-3, because I think anyone with more than 2 brain cells should be able to see that increasing the mana cost by a significant amount without actually giving that big of a boost of power to the card is not a buff. It's a fucking nerf. And I don't expect to be alone in feeling this way. A lot of people really liked Elsa. A lot of people really liked playing her with things like Kitty and Angela. And people were really hopeful about this buff. It's also been a long time coming. I think they talked about this like 2 months ago. They're 1 month in advance of setting these patches is a fucking terrible thing for the game. And I really wish they would just stop doing it altogether and rely more on the OTAs, because the vast majority of times they do this, the changes just make no fucking sense in the context of the live game. At best, changes don't have much of an impact, and at worst, they are an actively bad thing. And that is just not a feeling you want your patch to have if you want people to receive it positively. So yeah, that's my Elsa rant. I'd be curious if you feel the same or differently. I'd like to hear it. And again, I mean this sincerely. I would like to see someone make an Elsa deck that can work. But this iteration of the card is probably the worst one we've had yet. And I don't say that lightly. Maybe they'll get their shit together eventually in another 3 months when they revisit the card and are surprised that, oh wow, our buff didn't actually pan out. But for the time being, I think if you're putting Elsa Bloodstone in your deck, you're actively making it worse. That's all for this one. I'm done. I'm out. Peace.